The Orleans Parish District Attorney considers criminal charges against a former New Orleans priest as a new article published today outlines allegations going back nearly 60 years against Father Lawrence Hecker.
As Rob Messon reports, the article in The Guardian details how Hecker remained an active priest for 13 years in spite of allegations which were known by 4 archbishops.
He was a practicing priest at churches across the New Orleans area for more than 40 years, and new allegations of child molestation involving Father Lawrence Hecker, outlined in The Guardian, say the archdiocese knew as far back as 1988.
These individuals who were protected for decades and still are.
Attorney Richard Trahant is now trying to get a federal court to unseal a deposition taken of Hecker 3 years ago. That, as the Guardian article reports that former New Orleans archbishops dating back to Philip Hannon knew of Hecker's sexual abuse of young boys. The Guardian reports that Hecker confessed to the misconduct or abuse of 7 teenagers between 1966 and 1979, including overtly sexual acts, with at least one occurring on an overnight trip to a Texas theme park.
If the priest said under oath in a deposition that the archdiocese knew something and hid it, for instance, it's very damaging. It's all going to depend on what he said.
The Guardian reports the archdiocese sent Hecker to counseling or new church assignments without notifying authorities, who are just now receiving records in the Hecker case.
If there's evidence in sealed records of an adult sexually preying on a child, I've got to investigate that, and it needs to be brought to criminal court.
The Guardian article says that a victim's mother reported to former Archbishop Hannon in early 1988 that her son claimed that he and Hecker had sex together. The report also says that Hecker, who headed the Archdiocese scouting program between 1966 and 1972, confessed to his superiors in 1999 that he either sexually molested or otherwise shared a bed with multiple teenagers he met as a priest. Fox 8 confronted Hecker, who is now 91 years old, 3 years ago.
Can you tell us, did you sexually assault children?
No comment.
The Guardian says that Hecker admitted to sexually abusing children over a 15-year period beginning in the mid-1960s, calling it a time of great change in the world and in the church, and saying, "I succumbed to its zeitgeist." But Hecker continued to work for the church until his retirement in 2002 and received retirement benefits until 2020.
When the Committee of Unsecured Creditors filed a motion to stop that payment, with respect to Hecker and several other pedophiles, the Archdiocese fought to continue to pay credibly accused pedophiles.
The DA now reviews the Hecker case and possible criminal charges involving a priest who still lives in New Orleans.
In this case, there seems to be things that are happening a long time ago, so I think it's going to be very germane as to when the act occurred, what is going to be the charge that can be proven, and what is the statute of limitation on that charge.
And this afternoon, we got this statement from the Archdiocese, which says, in 2009, when Archbishop Amen was named Archbishop of New Orleans, Lawrence Hecker had been removed from ministry for 7 years and had been reported to law enforcement. The Archdiocese of New Orleans has and will continue to cooperate in any law enforcement investigation concerning Lawrence Hecker or into wrongdoing by any other cleric, employee, or volunteer. We reached out to Hecker's attorney for comment on this story, but have not heard back. A federal judge now considers whether Hecker's deposition should be unsealed.